everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. My name is Sam. I'm joined, as always, by my hero and cohort, James Lanier. How are you today, James?
Fantastic, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I was traveling all weekend to see my son pitch in college, so I'm happy to be home back in Austin. As we branch out today, I wanted to just for a quick moment tell you, the audience, listen, we see you. We know that this is hard. I talk to people all day long who will say, "Hey, we watch your podcast and it makes us feel like we're not the only one." And some of you, you're not on our client list. You're not seeing me, you're not seeing James, but we know that you're watching and listening, and we just want to tell you. We just want to affirm you. Look, this is hard. This is really hard. It's why we work so hard to put together podcasts that can help you right where you're at. So, wherever you are, whatever country you're in, wherever you're listening, on behalf of James and myself, we see you. We know that this is hard, and you're not the only one dealing with it. Sometimes people say, "Man, this podcast, it felt like you guys were just talking to us." Right, because you're not the only one dealing with these issues, right, James?
Oh, it's so true. So true. And I love that so many people do listen and really feel like they're helped by the information that we put out there. It warms my heart.
So today's a hard hitting one, and we've never shied away from hard hitting topics. But today is one that goes right for the jugular. Today is episode 40, so we're making the turn around episode 40 and really excited to keep going. Today's question, if you will, is what is toxic negativity and what can be done about it? I'm sure there's a number of people that just were like, "Oh my gosh, it's about time. Thank you. Let's get to work today." So, James, as we get to work, what is toxic negativity?
First of all, let's just say that it's as it's experienced by unfaithful and by betrayed, it's really typically chronic and often acute. I know those two things are supposed to be different, but acutely chronic, like it's all the time, but it's also acute. And it is this tendency to be downbeat, to be disagreeable, to be skeptical, cynical. It's really a pessimistic attitude that always seems to expect the worst. It happens because the brain works that way, where it's about survival. So what is the brain going to do when as an organism, it's got to keep us alive. So what's it going to do? It's going to pretty much look at everything through that lens of, is there any danger here? Is there any threat here? And that is going to basically make it take things negatively, which is why, if you think about it, so many of us who want to change our negative thoughts find that it's so much harder to be positive than it is to be negative. And that's really
Hmm.
part of the problem, is because that's how the brain is. The problem is that when we think negatively, it's also self-perpetuating. The more we are exposed to it, the more other people are, the more we are to our own brain saying negative things, it's going to generate additional negative feelings and thoughts. So basically, the more emotional we get, the more real that even imaginary negative thought becomes. And so the brain is going to take that as real. When we think over and over again in a negative way, it actually rewires our brain, just like when we're working on the opposite. When we're trying to break a bad habit or break a compulsion or an addiction, we're trying to establish a healthy neural pathway. When we are thinking negatively all the time, it's rewiring our brain into that negative constantly. And so then what it does is it rewires all of the associated things or certain associations, and that fast tracks us right into the negative, even if it's not a negative situation. So if we consistently come to expect that something's going to be negative in a given situation or from a certain person, then that cue, the situation or an upcoming situation, or that person, like the unfaithful for a partner, to be emotional and or angry or sad because of the betrayal, that's something that then we begin to dread, and our brain actually goes into an automatic negative loop feedback or feedback loop, and it's going to cause an immediate negative response before we even have the conversation. And the
Because the brain, As I understand it, the brain can't really distinguish between facts and fantasies, right? It doesn't really know what's real in terms of negativity.
Doesn't, and it also can't tell time. So if we are filtering everything through a negative filter all the time, the brain is going to believe us. And then
Hmm.
perpetuate that because it's going to take that in as fact and information, and then it's going to prepare every time that something's negative, like it's a threat. So we spend a lot of time in our amygdala or our survival brain because it's assuming that there's an impending disaster or danger. And so our limbic system's going to take over, which is our basic survival brain, raw emotions, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so that's activated. It's getting all the blood, and blood flows diverted from our frontal lobes, which are the ability to think our way out of it and the ability to regulate our emotions. As that happens, we get less and less capable of defending against the negative threat. And we end up in a basically a reactive mode. And if you think about it, when the blood recedes, we just have no real control over ourselves. And then what ends up happening is that the brain starts trying and trying and trying to survive all that time. And it's emptying out dopamine, which isn't just about pleasure, but it also helps us retrain our brain. It's basically the hormone that allows us to retrain or rewire our brain in a positive way. And if we're feeling less and less happy, it's going to retrain it in a negative way. And then we'll get less and less of it. It also empties out our adrenaline, which means that we'll have lower energy, we'll have fatigue, we'll be less able to fight the negativity. So that's a problem.
Right. Big time problem.
There's another thing in the brain that people don't really know very much about, and that's that the moment that we express even the slightest degree of negativity or show it, whether it's spoken or shown, that actually increases the negativity in not only our brain, but on our partner's brain as well, or whoever's listening to us. So now their brain is starting to rewire and change in response to that negativity. So they're going to be more negative if it's done enough. So the more we stay focused on these negative things, it actually, when I say changes our brain, it not only rewires it, it changes the shape and structure of these different parts of our brain that regulate memory, feelings, emotions. Our sleep may get disrupted, appetite, the way our brain regulates happiness, longevity, and overall health gets affected. And that's going to result in things like heightened depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, constantly watching for things to be negative or wrong, which is self reinforcing. So the negativity builds on itself. So it's like this downward spiral.
It really is a spiral. I know you can speak to this. People come to your intensives or they meet with me, and man, they feel like they're in a spiral and they just can't break out of it. But it's not just for the unfaithful. And the betrayed can experience toxic negativity too, not because they're sitting back just being negative Nancy, and that's all you want to talk about is the affair. No, no, no. We're talking about the experience of betrayal trauma that they are trying to process through, and then they've got relapses or they've got new information and trickle truth and all of that. And so, why would a betrayed not struggle with toxic negativity, especially when their partner is negative, right?
I think much more so when their partner is toxically negative, because it does affect their brain in that way. I talked to Sharon about, okay, because I used to be this way, just in case anybody out there is wondering if we just pull this stuff out of thin air or if we've actually had experience with it. I was Mr. Negative. My nickname that Sharon gave me was Hellboy. That's how
Oh,
bad, not the movie character either, although it might have looked like that.
right.
But for her experience of me being toxically negative, it was absolutely exhausting. She said the negative mood that I was in pretty constantly, honestly, it would more vary from, okay, here's the negative mood, and now it's more negative. And it wasn't ever really positive. I should probably do that opposite, but it was never really positive. So that negative mood drained all of her positive energy. And it's positive energy that attracts people to each other in terms of collaborating and connection. And negative energy is they're going to go apart, whereas positive energy is going to attract. This is also in us anyway, often caused by shame. Now, for a betrayed, they also get this shame for having been betrayed. And the shame really goes with, I can't talk to anybody because I'm going to be judged. So when they get that shame, that is also a singular experience, as our own shame is for us. And that also means that it's divisive. When we're in that negative space as unfaithfuls, our partners can't reach us. It's kind of like coming up against a wall all the time.
And then don't you think the betrayed start to feel kind of like a failure? They will personalize this and they will feel like somehow they're failing.
Yeah, that they're not a good enough wife or husband, or they're not even a good enough friend because the negativity is so rejecting that they can't help but feel like I'm doing something wrong here. They also end up thinking that their unfaithful just must not care about them because they're
Mm.
not even lovable enough to be cared about. And it ultimately also leads to constant worry and feelings of insecurity. So we have to think about that too. I urge people to think about what this is doing to you in your brain, what it's literally changing the size and shape of structures, which, by the way, when we do the opposite, we're going to get to it, we'll change it in a positive way too. So it can be changed and undone, but it's also doing the same things to your partner.
Because we do have a choice, and we're not talking about just toxic positivity, right? I had a guy that I worked with at one point. He was so positive to the point where I was like, bro, are you not hearing what I'm saying? Like, you seem to be minimizing how awful my life is right now. I just want some validation. I don't want toxic positivity. And that's not what we're talking about. But we are calling out this real toxic negativity. So, for the unfaithful, as we started this whole thing off today, how does the unfaithful experience toxic negativity?
Pessimism, chronic cynicism, everything. Oh, yeah, right. Okay, yeah, right. Oh, they're so goody two shoes. I really doubt that they really love people or do that kind of thing that way. But overall unwillingness to engage in anything different or positive, being antagonistic, feeling or being contrary, like we combat everything positive that comes our way, being uncooperative, moody, grumpy, gloomy, you know, just that. Yeah, I have moods. They're all blue and down. I have moods.
It's the automatic go-to response, basically, right?
Becomes automatic. It's I'll never be good enough. They must think I'm stupid for saying that. That situation is destined to turn out really badly. I'm a piece of garbage. That's a big thought. If they really knew me, they really wouldn't want to know me. My partner's always going, dum, 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 dum. I can't possibly do that, so I might as well give up. I can't do anything right. I fail at everything. You know, everybody hates me. Nobody loves me. I think I'll just go eat worms. I suck. You suck. You always do this and this and this wrong. The heck with them all.
Yeah.
Anything like that. That's just what we're experiencing. And guess what? It's like constant. It just won't let us alone.
Because we don't just wake up and decide to be negative. There's triggers that are pretty common that when we unfaithful experience negativism or toxic negativity is our go-to. What are some of those triggers? So both the unfaithful can have a litmus test, but the betrayed can be like, maybe he or she was triggered with
Yeah,
this.
triggers can be actual or they can be perceived. If
Right.
we experience them enough, our perception changes about things that really aren't that much of a trigger. It's just that they come at us like they are because that's how we're perceiving them. That's the filter that they get run through. Being rejected, feeling judged, feeling like we've disappointed somebody. Remember that one from your parents, right?
All too well.
I'm just disappointed. Well, actually,
Right.
that hurts more than somebody being angry. being criticized, feeling like we've been abandoned or that our spouse is withdrawing love, perfectionism, that piece of garbage syndrome. But once it starts to spiral, and that becomes trigger after trigger after trigger because it's a bunch of self-shaming. If we have childhood negative experiences or messages that get repeated, or something sounds even close to them, then that's another thing that can trigger stress, fatigue, anger, resentment, shame, feeling like something is unjust, feeling put upon, like I got to do that again. All of those things, there, I'm sure, are plenty more.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. Now, some people might be listening going, what does it look like? Okay, you're describing my partner to a T now, but help me understand what to look for. What does it look like? What are some common thinking patterns maybe that show up?
I think these are going to really help people get a little clearer on it. Like, oh, wow, that's negative stuff. I mean, it might be kind of obvious or it might seem obvious, but sometimes if we can categorize it, it makes life a lot easier.
Right. Absolutely. And we're a big fan of making things easier.
We are. Anything that looks like black and white or all or nothing thinking. A lot of times we'll take really complex issues and we'll oversimplify them so that they're yes or no, good versus bad, me versus them. Either I'm a complete success or I'm a complete failure.
Right.
It's kind of absolutish like that is really negative thinking. Jumping to conclusions. In that would be making assumptions about what other people are thinking, generally negative assumptions or negative assumptions about how things are going to turn out. And you know what? It can be really difficult to correct or change that type of negative belief about yourself or your partner. And it's vital that we're able to change it. Another one would be catastrophizing, always assuming that the worst outcome will happen without necessarily considering what's more likely or what might be more realistic possibility. Fortune telling, predicting that a situation or a talk is going to turn out badly or poorly. Um, and it can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that would be where our negative vision of the future is so entrenched that it can actually destroy our ability to behave in a way that's going to make change. So we end up with exactly what we think we'll end up with. For example, empathy. I can't get this empathy thing right. I'm never going to get it right or ever to the satisfaction of my betrayed. So what happens? I give up. I don't put the effort into learning or pressing through it because it's hard to learn, which leads to continued difficulty with being empathetic, which then is self-confirming. So then we give up. Labeling, we put negative labels on ourselves. I'm just this, I'm just that, or he's just this, or she's just that, or this situation's always like that. And it's going to affect how we feel about ourselves in different contexts. So if I label myself as a bad partner, for example, that's often going to lead to negative feelings about myself. And I'm going to end up being hypervigilant in what could just be a nice, easy going situation when
Right.
my partner, and I'm always going to be looking for that negative. Another one would be imperatives or shoulding. I should this,
Mm-hmm.
should statements contribute to a negative perspective because we're only thinking in terms of what I ought to be doing. And so that eliminates looking at what I might have done well. And it also makes me hypercritical. I overanalyze what I've done just to find the faults in it. Well, I could have done it this way, or could have done it that way. And it's usually unrealistic. So you end up feeling defeated and pessimistic. Big one, personalization and blame. Taking things personally even when they aren't. I think that's actually quite a human thing to do, but it's really amplified with this kind of toxic negativity. It leads to self-blame for things that I really have no control over. And when you take issues or details that have nothing to do with you and make them all about yourself, your feelings or your role in matters, your partner feels like you're in the same old victim role. And guess
Right.
when that's happening, she or he is excluded and their feelings are discounted. Again,
Well, and that's where we do those things and then we do this fun little thing called mind reading, right? Where we assume that we know exactly what our partner thinks and feels, or anybody for that matter. And so then we react to what we are projecting onto them. So just because our partner is a little bit short or our partner doesn't give us a full answer, the bells and whistles go off. Here we go again. I guarantee it. I did something wrong again. No, maybe your partner was multitasking. Maybe they had just a bad moment. Maybe they were thinking about something and it was just a one off. But we're over here going, see, now the night's ruined, the date's ruined, our whole night, there's not going to be any, it's just, and then we start to do the things that you talked about. Catastrophizing was one of my favorites that I would do because I didn't know how to stop and go, perhaps I'm wrong here. But then we get into the inability to be wrong, right?
Or the need to be right is paramount. No, no, I am right and you are wrong. If you
Right.
be wrong, you can't ever look what at areas that you need to grow and make that growth, make those changes. There's no space for it. Um,
Because being wrong is, it's okay to be wrong. Look, if you're an unfaithful, you've already made the chief wrong. So getting okay with being wrong when at least you're trying is part of the growth. You're going to get it wrong. There's going to be moments you blow it and then you get back up again. We're not talking about relapse. We're not talking about those types of things, but misreading, miscommunication, it's going to happen, my friend. It is part of the process, right?
yeah, it's part of the process. We are going to fall flat.
Said it this way. You said it. I'm sorry to interrupt. You said it this way. If you can never be wrong, you can't look at it so there's no space for your growth.
And that's like we have to be able to examine how we've done things to be able to improve. And this is different from the picking things apart and looking for the tiniest little errors and such, which can be a product of the negative thinking. And what it means, though, is if I'm going the opposite way, trying to protect myself from that negative thinking and just say, nope, I'm always right, well, then we can't look at anything that could
Mm.
potentially be an area that we can grow in. And believe me, we need to grow or we'll stay in exactly the same place. Like you like to say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Okay, so there's also this issue of control that kind of goes into that a little bit. And so these mistaken beliefs in control, and there are two types. One is believing I have no control over anything in my life and I'm powerless to change it. And then two is believing that I have absolute control over everything in my life. That would be the I'm never wrong piece. But unfortunately, what that means is I'm also entirely to blame for any negative or difficult circumstance, even the things that I didn't cause. So now I'm pulling it all in. Believe me, we've messed up enough that we don't have to pull everything else in with it.
Oh, dear God, absolutely, that is true. So, what can we do about it? What are some things that we can actually do?
I'm going to start with two ways not to do it, and a capital NOT. One is thought stopping techniques. So that's not to say that there's another part to that. We can thought stop, but we have to add another part, which we'll get to. But thought stopping techniques on their own is suppression. So, nope, I can't be negative. I'm not going to be negative. No, stop that. Right? Well, what am I doing? I'm stuffing it down, right? It's a problem because it's being hypervigilant all the time, thinking the negative thoughts, always looking for the negative, and then trying to just eliminate them. But you cannot get rid of them. What you're really doing is, and I like to think of it this way, you've got the Chinese takeout box, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've eaten like half the rice, but you know how they always send you like eight more, right? So now you're like, well, I want to have that rice. I'm going to refrigerate it. So you're trying to make it all into one thing so it can just fit. And you're stuffing like 8 packs of rice into this thing that really can only take a half a pack, but you're stuffing it in there. What's going to happen? Those things are folded cardboard. They're going to split out of the sides in ways you don't want it to. And
Yeah.
when you try to stop your negative thoughts, that's what you're doing. You're stuffing them into this carton that can only take so many before it comes out sideways. It's probably going to come out sideways in vitriol, anger, nastiness, all kinds of ways that you're not going to be able to take back. And the problem with that is the negative thoughts are going to come back stronger
Mm-hmm.
So your negative thoughts are going to get worse, not better, because you're not actually eliminating them. That's known as thought rebounding. And it's actually much more damaging. If you think about everything we said about the brain, it's much more damaging.
Right.
Way is the toxic positivity that you talked about earlier. And that's trying to get rid of the negative in a way, but it's more trying to say, okay, nope, no negatives, only positive, only positive, only positive. Woohoo! Yeah, yeah, we're going to be positive. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Rather than actually processing the negative thought, because it's there for a reason. So how can I process that? And so I'm only going to look at the positive. So again, I'm suppressing the negative. It's going to explode uncontrollably again if I'm just doing it this way. So it's not just a negating of the negative, saying it doesn't exist. This is a, oh no, everything's great. And I'm not talking about
Yeah.
the silver lining here. I'm not talking about healthy affirmations. But the deal is, if we just go to an affirmation without processing the negative, then it's going to stuff the negative.
Right. So what do we do now
We
that we talked about what we don't do?
we thought stop and we replace. We can replace with positive things, but I'm going to talk about something that's generally known in the shrink world as cognitive restructuring. It's very behavioral. Everybody will like that because it's like a ABC that you can follow. Cognitive restructuring really is about challenging our thoughts, and we go through some steps to do it. The first is what I call noticing. So you're just going to notice the thought. Why do we do that? Everybody goes, oh, he's going to talk about mindfulness. No, I'm not. Mindfulness is awesome. Noticing is part of mindfulness. But what it really does is the moment we notice, oh, that's a negative thought, what does it do? It stops us from going down the spiral of negativity because now we're looking at it. It's actually engaging a different part of the brain, the analytical part of the brain. And so when we start looking at it that way, we're going, oh, okay, now we're a step outside of it. And now we can actually look at it. This is an important, vital step to this. Now we can actually look at it and go, well, is that realistic? Is that for real? Or is that just something my negative mind has been making up or blowing out of proportion? And then we can kind of look at it and go, well, where else has this happened that I've kind of not been on the right track with it? I can evaluate if my thoughts are actually on track with what's been happening. Then I'm able to actively challenge the thought and look for alternative explanations. So I can, okay, yeah, I'm not seeing where that goes. Why else might I have gotten that negative or be feeling sad or angry or upset? Okay, oh, okay, I can actually work with that. There's no hopelessness then. So we actively challenge it by going, okay, no, I've really got to think about this. Where else could this have been happening? That active part is so important. Then I can think about what I'd gain versus what I'd lose if I continue down that path. What's my payoff, basically?
Right.
Or have a positive payoff, makes you feel better immediately. Then, oh, geez, if I keep going down there, I'm going to end up in that same space emotionally that I've been in. And so is everybody around me. And then I'm able to recognize where that thought's coming from. Remember the list that we did up right before this, catastrophizing, labeling, etc.
Right.
And assign the category that negative thought is in. Now I can deal with it because I've made it concrete. Let's say it's labeling. I want to go in a different direction. How might I do that? Because if we're negative thinkers, we might be going, yeah, I deserve that. But what I would do is, because here's a really good one, consider what would Sam say to me about that? Or what would my best friend say about that? Or what would my wife say about that? So that I'm getting that more empathetic internal response. I'm able to go, oh, okay, well, if Sam would say that kind thing to me, maybe I can say that to myself.
Great point.
So this is a process that we can go through that's actually pretty logical. People love the logic, right? It doesn't say, okay, well, now I've got to go deep into the emotion. Not that, I mean, I love that. Oh, heck, bring it on. I'll help you with that. The deal is, if we want to build a new habit, in other words, build a new neural pathway, we've got to repeat it hundreds of times. Literally, we do. By the way, how many negative thoughts do you have in a day? The average person has 130 negative thoughts in a day. It's really 130 to 150. Well, 100 times a day, you have the opportunity to change this. Go through this really quick. This isn't a hugely time consuming process. You can get really good at it. Just the act of noticing, by the way, there was a study on that. They just noticed how often they were having a negative thought, and they would just mark it like a one, two, like this, five. Within 30 days, just the noticing, not even doing these other pieces, took it down by 70%.
Hmm.
I can't do math to save my life, but it took that from 130 to whatever's, right? Okay. Wow. Who wouldn't want that? That's just noticing. That's not even going through the cool process here.
Yeah.
Then, biggie, what we do is a positive replacement. So we've gone through this. Now we're positively replacing that. You can say an affirmation now. Again, another study, 30 days, changed this significantly. So, okay, after you've processed this negative thought, not before, because that's just the toxic positivity. This is the growth type of positivity. Now you can go against the negative thought with something that it's opposite because now you've processed it and now your brain's open and ready for that change. You're not stuffing it by doing the positive. And you end up with some really great stuff, man. So the more you practice this, let's say you do your 30 days of noticing those negative thoughts, running it through. What's going to happen is you're going to have noticeable better emotional regulation. Your body, you won't notice this so much, your body is actually going to turn on like a switch, these stress reducing genes. You might notice it. You might notice, wow, man, I have lower stress. A gland in your brain called the thalamus, and it sends out the hormones that you need to function. So it's actually going to respond to all the incoming replacement messages, and it's going to relay that information to the rest of the brain. So your brain's gone, oh, okay. So this isn't as bad as we used to think. Then things like dopamine are actually going to build up and be refueled so that your brain is actually able to make changes and you'll be, frankly, we'll just say it, happier. Your anxieties and doubts are going to fade away. Not entirely, of course, but they're going to fade and your entire body's going to relax. And let me tell you a little secret here. Your trauma brain cannot be activated. Your amygdala cannot be activated in a relaxed body. Can't. That's why breath work works. That's why that imagining yourself relaxing your toes and your ankles and that thing all through your body works because your amygdala can't stay fired up.
Mm.
You can add to that somatic interventions like breath work, like the hand over the heart, hand over the belly, the tapping,
Right.
because that's going to stimulate your polyvagal system, which is your sympathetic nervous system, which is what calms you. So that's going to help your body relax. You're going to get into a position where your negative thoughts are much easier to observe and run through that. So it all works together beautifully if you use these interventions over time. So this isn't like use it once and everything's copacetic. If you use these consistently, then your sense of compassion, empathy is going to grow. Interestingly, in your brain, this is going to increase the thickness of your neocortex and it's going to shrink the size of your amygdala. I talked about before how it can negatively affect. So, what that means is when you're negative, 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 your amygdala is going to grow in size, especially the right side, which is in charge of our fight flight. And when we do this other work, it's actually going to stabilize this more so we don't lose the blood flow as quickly. And your amygdala, it's actually going to shrink. So the fight, flight, fawn, freeze is not going to be immediately activated. It's going to take a little more to activate it, which is really what we want.
Right.
Communication skills, social awareness, mood regulation, and our decision-making abilities are going to get better. We're going to be able to be more focused, more attentive. And here's a biggie. I can go into how much this stuff can affect your health negatively. When you're negative, it's these massive cortisol dumps. Well, too much cortisol in the body is unhealthy because it starts to break down your organs, it starts to break down your immune system and your heart and so on. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have less cortisol in your body. And guess what? You're going to have better physical health. And who wouldn't want that?
Absolutely. I think there's such great connection between the trauma in our bodies and the ability to regulate or be regulated or regulate our partner. And so we, by nature, want a quick fix. Give me 3 steps. If I can just do 3 steps, then everything just will be fixed. And we're dealing with some real deep pain and hurt when you're dealing with betrayal trauma and, like today's topic, toxic negativity. But the good news is there is the ability to break the cycle. So whether you're watching or listening or both, we just want you to know there's hope for you. There's hope for your own healing. And maybe there's hope for your relationship. But comedically, I will say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. We talked about that in the podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yes, this is what we need to do, implement it. Because if you implement it, you're going to see some kind of growth. It's not going to be fixed overnight. But if we can get 1% better every day, or if we can work a little bit harder to put these things into practice, we can get our lives back and we can get our brains back. That's the truth of it. Gosh, if we can get our brain back, man, life gets so much better. If we can help, you can reach out to us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. If you want to know about intensives, if you want to know about coaching with myself, by all means, reach out. Cannot do therapy or coaching over email. We appreciate some of you that have written us. We'll do our best. We see you. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Ask the Unfaithful, and we'll see you next time.